geopolitical commentator and investigative journalist. You're listening to Pelle Neroth Taylor on today's News Talk TNT.
Welcome to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show on the second hour of September the 12th, 2024. Well, interesting there, if you listen to the news, Trump was livid at the way that Kamala Harris was able to get away with lies, both on the issues that she cared about and lies about what Trump had said earlier. Maybe that was, and the ABC, owned by Disney Plus, and whose director is perhaps best friends with Kamala Harris. Incredible conflict of interest there. But that he was got angry, as most of us would, and perhaps that's what they were aiming for. Maybe to get him flustered and angry and seem to be sort of unstable. Basically, he was being gaslighted. Maybe there was no way out of that. Maybe he shouldn't have participated at all when he saw that the fact checking was totally on one side. They were basically Kamala Harris's lawyers. They were saying, Trump, why don't you do the blah, 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 misrepresenting him, and then saying, Kamala Harris, what would you do to combat this? I mean, a completely unneutral way of asking questions. Maybe you should have just walked out, as Jim Thorpe, my previous guest, suggested. Anyway, in our last 20 minutes, we're going to talk to Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell of the Daily Signal about the abortion issue, where she's going to sort of provide some detail, Trump, and actually put in a way that actually puts Kamala in a very bad light for the pro-life community, and actually explains that Trump's position is sort of far less extreme than the Trump derangement syndrome believers would have it. So that's in the second 20 minutes. We've got Wolfram Elsner, who's a German China expert, who's going to tell us a little bit about how we should handle China in a far less martial and aggressive manner, and try to explain and understand China's need for respect and equality, rather than picture them as an imperial antagonist. And that kind of relates to Germany's and Europe's failing economies. Germany's rapidly deindustrializing. We've got much more expensive energy than we did. We're threatened by migration on one side, the removal of, or potential removal of, American security, high energy costs, the higher the loss of trade from and with China. We're all in a bit of dire straits. And could peace in Ukraine be the answer? Well, we're going to talk about that for a bit after this message from our sponsors. For news from the North African region, the best website by far has to be maghrebi.org. That's spelt MAGHREBI.org. All the top stories from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Sudan, plus the Sahel countries, which have a growing problem with international terrorism. If you're into geopolitics, it has great analysis and coverage of these countries, which of course affects Europe and the West. So it's also on X at Maghreb MAGHREB underscore, sorry, MAGHREBI_.org. Anyway, well, this missile question, if you read the headlines in The Guardian and The Times this morning, it's all about how the missile approval is practically a done deal. And of course, it's very controversial. The Russians have said it's a red line. But if you delve a little bit deeper, on Wednesday, that's yesterday, the ABC television network, maligned as they are, quoted a Ukrainian presidential advisor saying that US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky had made no decisions regarding the use of US weapons for strikes deep inside Russia. The Ukrainian advisor said that during the lengthy meeting, Zelensky presented to Blinken a detailed plan for how Kiev could use Western weapons to attack Russian territory and provide a list of possible targets. However, the Ukrainian official added that no decisions had been made on that score. Earlier, Blinken had told a joint news conference in Kiev with the British and Ukrainian foreign ministers David Lavy and Andrew Sybiga, that's the new Ukrainian guy, that the United States bore in mind the fact of a possible escalation of the situation in Ukraine due to discussions with the Kiev authorities on strikes with weapons deep into Russian territory. Now, this contrasts a little bit with what the Times was saying, the Times of London. Putin escalating conflict, say Western allies as missile approval moves closer. Blinken hints that US will lift restrictions on Ukraine using long-range arms in Russia. Decision understood to have already been made in private. The Secretary of State says in Kiev that US will continue to adapt policy. British government sources indicated that a decision had already been made to allow Ukraine to use Storm Shadow cruise missiles on targets inside Russia, although it's not expected to be publicly announced on Friday when Starmer meets Biden in Washington, D.C. The two leaders are planning to discuss the war in Ukraine and how this could be ended as part of a wide-ranging foreign policy discussion. No press conference is scheduled, what is expecting to be a short visit. Starmer's second to the US as Prime Minister. Blah, blah, blah. It would be considered unnecessarily provocative to make a public announcement about long-range missiles in Kiev. It's likely there'll also still be restrictions around Kiev's use of the missiles, which have a range of at least 190 miles. Well, this is a sort of headline. If you'd have to kind of parse it, and they might not strictly contain lies, these articles, but if you just glance at it, you said, well, oh, there's an escalation in prospect. Wow. But if you pass it, well, it says, for a start, well, there's going to be no public announcement, no press conference. Well, isn't that convenient? So they won't be asked whether Biden in Washington has actually approved the use of these missiles as what. Then in a sub-clause, it said there'll be still restrictions of the use of the missiles. And then these decision had already been made. Well, I mean, the decision had been made to use by the Brits to allow Shadow cruise missiles, but that doesn't indicate whether the Americans allowed missiles to be used. So we've long known that the Brits have said okay to their Storm Shadows being used, but it hasn't been clear whether the Americans have given their say so in that article, although you might think so just by the way it's structured, that you just read it and you'll see, well, this is a shit sandwich. They say things that they promise things in the headline that are not quite followed. That's the kind of, the article itself is kind of the small print, which you read closely, doesn't actually live up to the dramatic promises of the headline. And as said, if that ABC News quote is true, then no decision has been made. It could be that the Brits, because it's the Brits pushing this, incidentally, haven't seen anything on CNN or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. People who regularly watch this show know that I say that the Brits are pushing this war. It could be that the Brits are creating strategic ambiguity. In another article I read, it said that they are using the ever present threat of using these missiles in Ukraine against Russia is sort of the red line for Russia, which could escalate into World War III. That could be an overhanging thing that the Brits are going to use as a negotiating tactic when dealing with the Russians at the UN General Assembly, which I think starts next week or the week after. And they actually explicitly say that. And it could be, as I said, strategic ambiguity. If the Russians don't know whether these missiles are going to come or not, at high speed at their bases or their cities, then they'll be nervous or tense or whatever. So that could be a strategy. So my tip, I mean, it could be disproved in the next couple of days, is that Americans, Biden, and maybe the Pentagon still haven't said yes to the Brits. But the whole article has been wrapped around that possibility to make it seem as if approval has been given. I don't think we'll see those missile attacks anytime soon, and I'll eat my hat if they do turn up. Anyway, I think there's been a kind of sobering up in Europe. The German Zeitenwende is empty rhetoric, says the Kiel Institute of Economic Research, one of the nation's economic leading think tanks. At current rates of procurement, Germany would reestablish its 2004 capabilities in combat aircraft in about 15 years, says this West German Institute. In tanks in roughly 40 years, and in howitzer only in about 100 years. It says it's a press release from this very pro-Atlanticist think tank. Moritz Schullerich, the president of the Kiel Institute, says the Zeitenwende, that was a reference to Germany taking a new aggressive approach to Russia, or epochal shift in military spending promised by the German government in 2022, has so far proved to be empty rhetoric. So there you go. I mean, even at the heightened rates of spending, Germany is far away from being able to stand toe to toe with the Russians. And and one of the issues is that they've emptied out the larder to help the Ukrainians, and certainly doing a lot of that. Meanwhile, there's a very interesting thing. Poland is known to be one of the most combative opponents of the Russians. And there's been a lot of talk about Polish soldiers, sheep-dipped as the phrase goes, pretending to be mercenaries or wearing Ukrainian uniforms or whatever, particularly in that attack against the Kursk Oblast, was it a couple of weeks ago, with Brits and French and God knows what involved. It's always a mystery to me. I mean, how many are involved? A lot of the alternative media have been talking this up and taking it as a fact. The Russian media are talking it up. Even the Nebenza, what's his name? The Russian UN ambassador, a very senior guy, in other words, has been telling the Security Council that all kinds of NATO nations are in Ukraine in large numbers. And it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, you'd kind of expect caskets to be turning up in large numbers if it's what they claim. I mean, they're talking about literally in the thousands. And I know that people said, well, there'll be a large number of helicopter crashes or senior officers dying on their mountain hikes. In other words, cover up for this, giving them alibis for dying when they in fact died in the combat zone. But I mean, there's been one or two here and there. You can't surely make up those numbers that are supposed to be dying. If there were large numbers of dying, we'd hear about it through the coffins returning. So maybe I'm agnostic about it. I don't know. But it's interesting saying that if anyone is guilty of sending troops into Ukraine, it's surely the Poles. But there's an interesting article here that there were two, Vovan and Lexis, are these two Russian bloggers and agents provocateurs who typically dupe public figures into talking to them by imitating various officials. Well, they released a video today featuring the top Polish diplomat, Radosław Sikorski. Of course, I mean, he's been he's out there with one of the most Russophobic men in the West. He's married to Anne Applebaum, who never ceases to rail against the Russians. And I think he was, back then in 2013, he's the one who inserted the clause into the association agreement between the EU and Ukraine, a kind of poison pill that said that Ukraine would have to adopt pro-Western security policies if it wanted a deal with the EU. So, I mean, he's a bit of a player, that guy. But he said to Vovan and Lexus that, and the tape has been put out on the net, that Warsaw has no intention of sending its own troops to fight Russia. Poland has zero willingness to send troops to defend Ukraine, he said to these two pranksters. At one point, the fake Poroshenko being a former Ukrainian president, so that's who they were imitating, asked whether Poland would be willing to join the team. But Sikorski said that Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk would be very reluctant to do so. Even the proposal to shoot down Russian cruise missiles over Western Ukraine with Polish interceptors was very, very controversial, since this would amount to joining the conflict. If the front started to collapse, things might change, but at the moment, there is zero willingness to do that. So it's interesting that, we're talking about whether the war is escalating or winding down, and I guess there are arguments for both things. What the things I've been citing in this last monologue suggest that things are maybe not as worrying as they seem. And there's a kind of mood music now with the UN meetings coming up. The UN General Assembly is, of course, the world's annual diplomatic boondoggle, where people turn up from all over the world, statesmen and ministers and diplomats. And the Russians are going to be there with Lavrov. And let's hope there'll be some behind the scenes back channel talks and with everyone involved to try and solve this conflict. And I said, I think all the missile debate, the missile posturing is a diplomatic gambit leading up to that. Meanwhile, of course, as said, we've got Europe has so many issues, and even the Germans, of course, the refugees welcome nation par excellence, is going back on some of those Merkelian promises after the success of the so-called far right in those recent regional elections last weekend, I think it was, and I think there's one coming up on the 22nd, and we'll be talking about that. But he's told Germany's told the EU that it can't take in many more migrants, or it says that German government resources are at a breaking point. Interior Minister Nancy Faeser has said, and Berlin has no choice but to bolster border controls as state and federal resources have been almost exhausted on refugees and asylum seekers. German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser has reportedly told Brussels. So Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government has announced that Germany would begin checking passports along the land border again for at least 6 months without regard to the Schengen Agreement. No country in the world can accept an unlimited number of refugees, Faeser said in a letter to the European Commission. And just on that note of Germany sobering up, Scholz has just told his federal parliament that he's hoping for peace talks with Russia, or the next set of peace talks have to involve Russia, not as happened in June in Switzerland, with the Russians as onlookers while the others stitch up a peace deal, which of course Russia wouldn't be able to accept. So maybe a sobering up there from Germany, along with the other little signals I just told you about. The big thing, the big sign that Germany truly has adopted rationality is when they start opening nuclear power plants. But maybe that won't come too soon, but who knows? Anyway, we're going to go into a break, and then we'll be back after the break. This is the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show on TNT News Talk.
CO2 sustains all life on Earth, but now it's in long-term decline. We face the return of an ice age. We mandate that the truth be told on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show, where we're staying on the topic of Germany and Europe with our next guest, Dr. Wolfram Elsner, who's the professor of economics at the University of Bremen, business studies and economics. He's a retired academic, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how we should handle China. The Marshall approach towards China kind of takes the shine off, in my view, some conservatives' view of Ukraine and Russia as being an unnecessary war, because some of them are saying, well, it's not because we dislike war per se, it's just that we need to wind down the Ukraine war so we can concentrate on confronting China. And there's the US blob in the form of the US generals Mike Moynihan, Patrick Ryder, and Ben Hodges have predicted war with China in 2025, no less. However, while China is an economic competitor for the USA for the number one position, it has no track record as a military hegemon, and we need to have perhaps a much more benign approach towards China in our own interest. Are you there, Dr. Elsner?
Yes, I'm here listening. Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I was reading an interview with you in an outlet called Mint Press or something, and you seem to be advocating a totally different approach towards China than the American deep state blob seems to advocate. Can you outline how the West, and particularly Europe, should handle China, and how we should try and understand China? Where is China going, and what are their intentions and motives?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I was stuck with the term you mentioned in the beginning, conservative. Yes, that's what I feel. What China is. China's foreign policy is very conservative, traditional diplomatic thing, while the revisionist approach to overturning, traditional corporation value-added structures that have developed over decades or centuries even. The revisionist approach comes from Washington, and that applies to everything. That applies to keeping up the international economic relations as well as international traditional diplomatic political relations. Everyone, the political West bloc is using the term rule-based, but no one around me and no one when I go to countries of the global South, Mexico or South Africa, so no one can realize anymore what rules are they. For them, the U.S. has no rules except their own core interests, and that applies to the Ukraine war as well. Look, the most recent allegations from the West Bloc is that China is actively supporting Russia in the war, which is of course complete nonsense, because what China really does and what the values, so to speak, of China is keeping up regular, traditional, you may say conservative structures in terms of cooperating, exchanging, international exchanging of commodities, people, ideas, etc. And that's that's why it refuses to get beaten apart from Russia, but it continues developing cooperation here, as well as it develops cooperation with, say, Vietnam, Thailand, Burma, the Southeast Asia, the global South in general, Africa, etc. Now you have these ridiculous things that the West comes with a big hammer in order to use a metaphor, in order to repair a cell phone. You cannot repair a complex thing and a tiny thing and a very detailed thing like a cell phone or any other, your computer, with a big hammer. So the sanctions are the big hammers, and what the whole story ends up with is that Europe still is importing masses of Russian gas and oil through third parties now. It comes officially from India, but it's Russian, of course. Yeah, the U.S. still import all kinds of high-tech products. It doesn't come officially anymore from China, but it comes now from Vietnam, but has 80% of supplies inside coming from China. So you cannot change and destroy and beaten up and fragment such a complex thing as the evolved international value-added structures by a big hammer, a rough, very a primitive thing like sanctions, etc. You just it's just inadequate.
I just wanted to, that's fine, divide the rest of this interview into two parts. One is, I don't know if China's come up to, I didn't think it came up during the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, but Trump famously in his last period in office said that, we need to take on China, although I think that it was mostly out of concern for the American working class who've been devastated. But that's not a political thing. It's the American corporations have chosen to offshore production. But he's going to do, the old social democrats in Europe, I'm located in Sweden and you're in Germany, they were concerned for the domestic working class above all, and they didn't want immigration or globalization. What we've seen since the Cold War is the neoliberal elite as well. They don't care about their own nation. So Trump is trying to care about his own nation. I don't know what he's going to, and Kamala Harris are separately proposing. The second thing I wanted to talk about is how Germany and Europe should and is proposing to deal with China now that the German economy is doing deindustrializing and terrible things are happening to us in Europe. Well, let's deal with the Trump issue first, the Trump and Kamala Harris and the American political approach. I mean, I said, over to you, sir. Yeah.
A very revealing discussion, and it conforms with what Trump has repeatedly said in interviews in the last weeks and months. Look, he's kind of a pragmatist, and compared to the Washington Dems, with their alleged values and all that, and their self-imposed order to save the world. Trump is a pragmatist. It turns out he's a pragmatist, more pragmatist than the Dems. What he said is something very, very interesting. Repeatedly said. He said, "Look, MAGA, of course, make America great again, America first." Well, who would oppose to that? I mean, everyone has the right to say my nation is important for me. Okay, make America great again. No one is against it. Not even China, the last one to be against that. What he has in mind and what he proposed is, okay, I don't hate anyone per se. I get along with Putin and I get along with Xi. And if the Chinese car producers build up their production sites in the U.S., and employing 10,000s of American workers, it's fine for me, So, and that is what the world needs. It needs that kind of pragmatism, and then he turns out not to be an isolationist at all, as the social democrats, the new social democrats, and the Dems, etc., elites, he would. No, he's a
Dr. Elsner, sorry, I've got to cut you off there. We just got to go into our 1 minute's news break, and we'll carry on this very topic. Trump as being pragmatic towards China after the news.
Where progress is influenced by revolution and evolution. We're today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show. We've got Dr. Wolfram Elsner with us, who's a professor of economics at the University of Bremen, retired. And we were just saying before the break there that, Trump is surprisingly pragmatic. He just wants to give jobs to American workers. And if you could reshore jobs by the Chinese opening up factories in Peoria rather than Beijing, that's a good thing. Rather than the militarists in Washington, of course, are talking about militarily confronting China, with Mike Moynihan, a U.S. general, saying that war could come in 2025. Well, Trump doesn't mention anything like that, so maybe war will be off the table.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think so? Trump
at the prototypical example that at that time the Dems made themselves was 80s, 90s. They did the same with the Japanese. When the Western car production had no tools anymore against the overwhelmingly larger productivity of the Japanese car industry at that time, lean production and all that. Then the Americans said, the U.S. said, just either you come here or you may no longer export your cars into the U.S. So what they did, the Japanese, of course, happily came in and built huge car productions. The Chinese would not refuse to do that. On the contrary, that would be a first step to get more cooperation again, get a rationality back into the international relations, and get a bit more peace in the world,
Mm-hmm. In other words, the Chinese have been painted out as much more a hostile enemy, of course. I mean, this is something that serves the U.S. military-industrial complex, but, you can deal. And at some point in this other interview, you're saying, well, they want to be recognized as an intellectual actor and player that wants to provide peace and stability in the world, and you need to stop demonizing them as we in the West. We have this authority complex, which is no longer interesting for the global South anymore. They're fed up with us, and we should be more humble. Don't you think?
Yes, exactly. Well, that is all, it's a social psychology, so to speak, of a system that is losing its hegemony, and it's going down and is struggling with all kinds of internal problems. If you look at the U.S., it's an elephant on very fragile feet, so to speak, on little feet and fragile feet. So this system could break down anywhere in the near future. We know a lot from history about how big empires break down. They often break down, and they are complex systems themselves, of course, and they break down at very surprising angles of the system. It must not be that primarily the military breaks down as such, and it would probably not. But look at the Roman Empire. They had the maximum of military under contract worldwide. And then in the old world, when it broke down right in the middle of its capital in Rome, no one would know anymore who is ruling here, and the 2,000 kilometers off, the soldiers were still there, like in Scotland, and then the Scottish people overran the Roman lines, easily. So you never know, and this is exactly the situation, and they know it. Clever people in Washington, like the top generals or so, they would know it, and they would know, of course, that they cannot afford any longer to have a full-fledged war with China. They would lose immediately, given the military technology that we know nowadays. Sorry,
just to switch the topic, you're a European, I'm a European. I think a lot about this. I talk to mostly American guests, but I'm always aware that we in Europe are maybe in trouble. should we stick slavishly to the American alliance? Should we grow up and get out of our parents' basement? What should we do? I saw there's the German Economic Institute, the Kiel Institute for Political Economy, said that the Bundeswehr needs 100 years to build up its artillery compared to what it was in the Cold War. So we demilitarize, basically. We're told to be aggressive to China, and we have this terrible conflict with Ukraine. Do you want to spend the next couple of minutes telling us what you think Germany and Europe should do in the next few years?
Yeah. Well, Germany is a prototype of a split country. You know, we have a huge split, increasing split between the big corporations with interests in China. They need that huge market. They need that huge, by now huge research and development potential there, and they explicitly say we cannot afford any decoupling. On the contrary, if you force us to decouple, and if you threaten us, the German and West European EU corporations, you know, if you threaten us with your sanctions, then we go to China and decouple ourselves there, build up an independent economy there. And what we have now is from all machine tools, tool machine and cars and all kinds of chemistry, etc. We have the big corporations, R&D, electronics, everything, building up there not only their production sites but also their R&D sites. You know, take the example of Bosch, a first-class, first-tier supplier. You know, they have their third R&D center for each $1 billion investment. You know, so and what they do is now making themselves independent from the West. Can you consider that? I mean, this is incredible. What they do is they force all their suppliers, the important suppliers from the West, either to come with them to China and build their own sites there, or they are off. And they would do the rest with the second tier, third tier, super clever, new established little firms in IT and so on as suppliers for them, you know. So what we see and observe is an independent German industry within China emerging, and the next step is, and some do that already, that they get legally independent from the West. Now, Germany, on the other hand, has a government and all the leading parties in Berlin more or less dependent and acting on behalf of Washington. So this is what they get now in the latest election. People know that. People are fed up with that. You know, they are frustrated. They are angry. And look, if you count together what the government parties get, it's about 50% or so. You know, So what we have, the incredible thing is that both left, what earlier was left and right, and you know, doesn't count anymore. The social democrats now worldwide, be it in Taiwan, be it in the Dems in the US, be it the German social democrats, they are among the worst warmongers at all. You know, they are changing the German state from democracy into a surveillance state. You know, nowadays, if you say a wrong word, you say something about the history of the Ukraine war, the prehistory of the war, you know, then you can get accused, can get torn to court, and may end in jail. Nowadays in Germany, that is the reality. Okay, so
I get the impression that your free speech is even worse than the UK and Sweden. I'm afraid we're going to wind up. So just to summarize what you're saying, Professor, you know, we've got German industry leaving the country and incorporating itself into China to save itself from European legislation or Washington's diktats. You've got Germany's an occupied country in the sense that a totally slavishly pro-Washington elite and political class and government, who are also at the same time crazy warmongers, and the people don't want this, and that's why.
Sorry,
yeah. And that's why the German public are voting against this. And what they have is the far right and the far left, so-called, which the media hate, but it's a receptacle for their protests against losing their economy just for the privilege of being Washington's vassal in Europe. Thank you so much there, Professor. I'm afraid you've got to wind up there, but we've got the elections in Brandenburg coming up. So love to have you on again there. Sorry,
yes,
Dr. Wolfram Elsner, Professor of Economics at the University of Bremen. Thank you so much, sir. And we're going to go on to our final guest in this hour after the break.
Pelle Neroth Taylor, live from Sweden on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show. Well, I told people I'm not a paid sponsor of thefederalist.com, but they had a fantastic 25-point fact check of Kamala Harris's claims. But I'd also like to add to that, there's another fantastic fact check on the Daily Signal written by Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, who's our next guest. She's a reporter of the Daily Signal covering life, gender, and education issues. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much.
I'm just going to read something. The abortion issue is very contested in the US, and rightly so. Here in Europe, it's not controversial, and it should be, because I'm very pro-life. I totally agree in your stance on that. Now, I'm just going to read from an article here. It says, when Kamala was asked whether she supports any restrictions on abortion, she dodged the question, instead claiming that she absolutely supports reinstating the protections of Roe versus Wade. Moments before that, however, Harris pledged to sign legislation such as the ill-named Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. In addition to her history of co-sponsoring the original version of that legislation, she's also voted against protections for babies born alive after botched abortions. Could you unpack that claim for me? Because I was looking up this claim for the Protection Against Abortions Act. Sorry. When babies are born alive, apparently this has been going on for a couple of years in the US Senate, and it always gets voted through, and it's never passed into legislation. But basically, at the moment, babies can be born alive and then aborted or left to die, and no one can do anything about it. Anyway, unpack that earlier statement for me, please.
Absolutely. So Senator Ben Sasse, he introduced the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. So when a baby is born from a failed abortion, in many states, the doctor is allowed to kill that baby. Even though that baby is born, it can survive outside the womb with proper medical care, and it can feel pain. And Kamala Harris herself voted to block a protection on these babies born alive in 2019. But she said in the debate, as you mentioned, that abortions in the 9th month, late-term abortions, are not happening. She said that women are not carrying their babies to the 9th month and then getting abortions. But data shows different. In fact, the moderator, Lindsay Davis, even weighed in and also said that these abortions of babies who are already born are not happening, but we know that they are. There have been at least 177 documented cases of abortions in which babies are born alive and then killed in the U.S. And Trump brought up former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam in a radio interview in which he was laying out what he believes are best practices for these late-term abortions where the infant is born alive, saying it should be between the mother and the doctor, and the government should not get involved. So abortions for babies that are born alive has become a fairly common far-left Democrat stance, and Kamala Harris has supported it, even if she says abortions in the 9th month are not happening.
Geopolitical commentator and investigative journalist. You're listening to Pelle Neroth Taylor on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show. We've got Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, who's a reporter for the Daily Signal covering life, gender, and education issues. And we were just talking about abortion, which was covered or talked about extensively in the Kamala Harris-Donald Trump debate. And it's obviously one of the most controversial issues out there. Elizabeth, we were talking about Tim Walz in his home state, and he'd signed a bill. I mean, there've been several born alive abortions. I don't know what your technical term of it, and allowed to die. I mean, that's your estimable fellow reporter was covering that for the Daily Signal just recently. Just tell us about that.
Absolutely. So there have been 5 documented cases during Kamala Harris's running mate Tim Walz's term as governor of Minnesota of these born alive abortions in which a baby is born from a failed abortion and then the doctor ends the life of that child, which has already been born and could survive outside of the womb with proper medical care. But Tim Walz actually got rid of the reporting requirement. So this may be happening more in Minnesota. We don't know how often because it's not mandatory to report it. So we know from from data that these born alive abortions are taking place in Minnesota and across the country, but a lot of places aren't even reporting them.
Yeah, incredible. And I want to talk about this the Women's Health Protection Act, which she supports. Abortion can be performed in the medical judgment of the provider, continuing the pregnancy would endanger the patient's life or health. Now, she wants this to be a kind of federal law, but what some of the abortion skeptics have said is that endangering the patient's life or health. Well, if you talk about health as being including mental health, so if the woman feels very depressed, she can have an abortion all the way up to 9 months. Is that right?
You're completely right. So using health of the mother clauses to justify abortion up to birth has actually been happening since 1973. On the same day as the Roe v. Wade ruling, Doe v. Bolton defined health of the mother to mean any factor that affects the woman, like you said, including mental health. So in America, since 1973, the same day as Roe, that it was allowed for women to get abortions up to birth for any reason if there was a health concern. And any doctor could just say, oh, her mental health, she needs to get an abortion. And that changed when Roe was overturned, of course, and went to the state level. But a lot of states have abortion amendments on their ballot this election cycle that have the same health of the mother clause that allow abortion up to birth if someone says the woman's health needs it, and health includes mental health. And Kamala Harris would like to codify this on the federal level. So any woman could get an abortion for any reason as long as their health is at risk, according to a physician.
Okay, could get, but has it been used? I mean, and how late are these abortions that have been carried out under that mental health clause?
Absolutely, this is definitely happening. Mm-hmm.
Really? Up to how many months? Even up to 9 months?
It can happen up to birth. Most of these abortion measures that allow abortion for the health of the mother, which includes mental health, say that that's up to birth throughout the pregnancy. There's no limit on health of the mother abortions. So this is being used at the state level, and Kamala Harris would like for it to be used on the federal level to justify limitless abortion on demand up to birth.
I'm just saying here that Harris told Americans on Tuesday night will sign a national abortion ban and hire a national abortion monitor who'll be monitoring your pregnancies and your miscarriages if she was elected. However, the 2024 abortion platform of the Republicans explicitly states that decisions about ending life of the womb should be left up to the states and mentions nothing about crowning a national pro-life coordinator. And CNN, which is not exactly known to be a friend of Trump, says Trump said Wednesday, this is a couple of months ago, that he would not sign a national abortion ban if elected to the White House. So what do you make of that? Is that it seems as if Harris definitely told a lie there.
Absolutely. Trump on numerous occasions has said he does not support a federal abortion ban, that Roe v. Wade returned the issue to the states, and that he's not going to get involved any further. He said that he supports early abortions and would do nothing to ban those. So Kamala Harris saying that Trump would ban all abortions is just a baseless claim.
And did she tell any other? I mean, this is a whole huge topic we could spend an hour talking about, because I know that in your article you mentioned Project 2025, which she's pushing and she's attributing to Trump. It's nonsense. I mean, he's denied it so many times. But are there? And we don't have time to go through that whole list, but just check out your article on Daily Signal, dear viewers. But are there any other fake news that she put across during the debate that wasn't fact checked on the abortion issue?
On the abortion issue, yes. So something really interesting that she said is that because of Trump's abortion bans, women are not able to get miscarriage care, which is absolutely false. In every single state in the country, regardless of how many pro-life laws they have, there is a health of the mother clause. So if the mother is dying and needs an abortion, or not an abortion, but it needs medical care, she can get that medical care. And miscarriages are not abortions and should not be equated with stuff that's extremely painful for these women who have miscarriages. It's a tragic loss of a life, and it is not an intentional ending of the unborn life, which is what an abortion is. In every state, miscarriage care is allowed, recommended, and it's just not happening that women are dying because they need miscarriage care and they can't get them anywhere in America.
And according to the Lozier Institute, which I'm sure is telling the truth, in every single state, in every single pro-life policy on the books in the United States includes exceptions for abortion when it's deemed necessary to save the life of a pregnant woman. So there you go. I mean, they don't have to worry that they're going to die for it. Do you think I mean, it's one of the most complicated, contentious things for Trump, and a lot of young women are not voting for Trump. Unmarried women are basically the huge voting group that will not go for Trump. Even like black men, even married women of all races are voting for Trump. Is that because of the abortion issue? And is there any way that Trump can change that?
I think that's definitely possible. I think Kamala Harris really loves talking about abortion. She really comes alive when she talks about it. It's something that she definitely is very comfortable with. And I think that is a reason that young women, college-age women, unmarried women, like you said, are somewhat supporting Kamala Harris because of a lot of people have stated that as a reason they like Kamala Harris. But I think Trump did a really good job at the debate highlighting that Kamala Harris doesn't just support abortion. She supports abortion up to birth and even after the baby is born. And while a lot of Americans do support some amount of abortion being allowed in America, very few Americans support late-term abortion when the baby can feel pain of the abortion and can survive outside of the womb. We know that babies are able to survive prematurely earlier and earlier. Babies at 21, 22 weeks are being able to get medical care when born prematurely and are able to survive. And I think while Kamala Harris has really used abortion to get a lot more votes, I think Trump did a good job at the debate highlighting how radical her abortion policies really are when it comes to late-term abortion.
Very good. Thank you. I mean, I'm pro anti-abortion, and I wish it were to become an issue in Europe, because I mean, I'm convinced that partly why our population is declining, and we're irreligious, and we have far too many of these it's destructive our morality to allow these late-term abortions. Anyway, Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, thank you so much. Reporter of the Daily Signal covering life, gender, and education issues, and do check out her fact check, as it were, of Kamala Harris, because the mainstream media aren't doing it, and that's at the Daily Signal. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and love to have you on again. This is the Pelle and Neroth Show, and we'll be back tomorrow with more guests and more analysis as usual at the same time. See you tomorrow.